Good morning, everyone. Why don't we get started? Grab something to eat, grab a table, make a new friend, talk to an old one. So I want to start out with a fact. 13,000, wait, did I get it right? Yes. 13,477. 13,477. That's the number of bills that have been introduced by the House and the Senate and the Congress so far, so since January of 2023. And out of those bills, a grand total of 51 have worked all the way through the legislative process and been signed into law by the president. Now, a lot of these bills address significant societal concerns, and many of the bills address more pointed things like renaming a post office or a street after a local hometown hero. But regardless, this Senate is on track to be this Congress rather, is on track to be the least productive Congress in over 50 years. So, with numbers that dismal, what can we do? I'm Elizabeth Duffy. I handle government relations for SSA. I'm based in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining me so early this morning. Together, let's take a look at how laws are made, how you can impact that process, and things that we can do to better our odds of having more than 51 bills passed during this Congress. So let's talk about the types of bills that are introduced. There are two main types of pieces of legislation that are introduced: authorizing bills and appropriation bills. Authorizing bills create a new federal program or extend the life of an existing program. They can also repeal an existing law. Authorizing bills establish the framework for a federal program and provide guidelines over a 2 to 5 year period for that program. It does not provide funds to operate that program, but it does provide the top amounts that can be appropriated to that program in the future. The other bills are appropriation bills. That's where the money is. The appropriation bill is the one that actually allocates funds to the federal government, to the programs and agencies. And unlike authorizing legislation, which remains in effect for 2 or more years, appropriations bills must be enacted into law each and every year. It's in the appropriations bills that the actual money is dispersed to the program or the agency as agreed upon. Each year, in fact, Congress must pass a series of 12 appropriation bills to keep our federal government and our agencies running. The money can be used for programmatic operations, for salaries or equipment, and for any activity as described in either the authorizing bill or the appropriations bill. So let's start by looking at a few of the authorizing bills we're interested in. And I'm a Mac person, and this is not a Mac, so give me a sec. All right, so obviously we track the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program. We also are interested in ensuring that the National Landslides Preparedness Act is authorized. The Tsunami Warning and Education Reauthorization Act is a bill that we follow, as well as the National Volcano Early Warning System. So where are we? What's up? So NEHRP expired on September 30th of 2023 at the end of the last fiscal year. Now, we've all been in the desert of NEHRP reauthorization before. I've been with SSA for quite a while. The last time that we were out of authorization for NEHRP was 9 years. It took us 9 years to get that bill reauthorized. So we are confident that NEHRP can continue through a desert of unauthorization. The 4 agencies that comprise NEHRP, however, have been appropriated through the FY24 continuing resolution, so we know that they've got the money to continue and operate as planned. I think, I slid past, didn't I? Sorry. Back. There we go. So that we know that the collaboration and the work is still getting done. But as always, we'd like to ensure that these programs are covered by an active authorization. It helps ensure the viability of the program and shows to Congress and the federal government the importance of the work that we're all doing. So on the Senate side, we have a bill that's been introduced by Senator Murkowski and Senator Padilla. So that bill's been introduced, but it's sitting in conference or in the committee right now. There's no hearing scheduled. On the House side, on the other hand, we've had a hearing. We had a hearing on NEHRP and WindHRP, but they have not dropped a bill yet. But we know that one is forthcoming because some draft language has been circulated, so we're confident that a House bill for NEHRP reauthorization should be introduced within the next month or so. Landslides. Well, seems to be a lot of love for landslides these days in Congress. We have a Senate bill that was introduced by Senator Murkowski and Senator Cantwell, and we have a House bill that was introduced by Congresswoman Del Bene. The Senate bill was scheduled for a hearing today, or a hearing yesterday through the committee, but it was pulled at the last minute due to some work on amendments. And the House bill has actually passed through committee and has passed into the ability for the House to vote on it as a whole. House Natural Resources held a hearing on it in February, so we know that they're moving forward. The Senate side has yet to hold a hearing on their bill, so we've been advocating that they do that. But in the meantime, there was the Weather Reauthorization Act, a bill that was introduced by Congressman Lucas in House Science Committee that included a straight-up reauthorization of landslides. It just changed the expiration date from 2024 to 2029. That bill passed the House yesterday. So we know that landslides is at least covered with an extension for the program when it's set to expire this year. However, both the Del Bene bill and the Senate bill have some changes and some programmatic changes to early warning and debris flow that are not included in the straight authorization that was in the Weather Act bill. Tsunami warning was also reauthorized. It's been out of authorization since 2022. But it was also included as sort of a footnote into the Weather Reauthorization Act. So, yay, TWIR has been reauthorized. That was an easy win. However, NVIEWS does not have a lot of love going on right now. It is expired. It expired at the end of last year. We don't have any indication that either the House or the Senate are interested in introducing an NVIEWS reauthorization bill. There was a little blip to the NVIEWS program in 2022, pardon me, when Senator Murkowski's Ash and Fume Act was passed, and what that did was it modified NVIEWS to bring in NOAA's expertise for collaboration and modeling around the volcano warning and operations centers. But NVIEWS as a program has been out of authorization and does not have active legislation pending. But we also follow the money, right? We follow the appropriations bills. And these are the agencies that we typically pay most attention to each cycle when an appropriations bill comes out. So we look at the USGS in its Natural Hazards Mission Area, NSF in its Earth Sciences and Geo Department, NOAA, NASA through its Earth Science Department, and FEMA because of its collaborative work with NEHRP. Let me pull up some numbers. I checked these this morning just to make sure I got the right ones because the numbers are a little bit odd. So, all right. Oh, look, I just grabbed Alaska. Okay. So the 2024 continuing resolution, we had a budget process, you may have heard about it, almost shut the government down a couple times, but the 2024 enacted level that finally passed in March was really hard on science agencies. They suffered some significant cuts through the enacted level of 24 that they're going to have to find a way to implement in just 6 months of a fiscal year as opposed to 12. So that will be challenging for each of the agencies. NSF took a big hit. They were docked about $2.3 billion overall, but the Earth Science Program and the Geo Directorate was just a smaller haircut, mostly flat, but NSF is going to have to find a way to absorb some of that cost. USGS saw a $42 million cut overall. NASA's budget went up, but their Earth Science Program was flat. And FEMA is facing a large reprogramming issue. So as long as their budget was increased, but they're having to reprogram it to deal with border control issues and immigration issues. So their funding for their outreach and their earthquake programs is flat, if not going to be facing a cut. So where we are now is the House and the Senate are beginning their hearings on FY25. That president's budget was released on March 11th, about a month late. So we're working on a compressed calendar to sort of get all of the work done. But the House and Senate are holding their required hearings and their committee meetings on the president's budget. They need to come up with the top line number. So the president releases a budget, which is sort of like a wish list of how he would like to see the federal government funded. I would like to say he or she, just to account for that, how the president would like to see the federal government funded, but it is up to Congress to actually dictate how that money is spent. They get a number from the Treasury that are the expected revenues, and then the House and the Senate say, this is it, this is how much we're spending, now let's fight it out and figure out how much of each of those 12 bills are gonna get appropriated. So they're working on agreeing to those top line numbers. Additionally, they're operating under a budget constraint of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which was signed last year. Again, you may have heard some stories about us facing our debt ceiling, and there was a threat of a government shutdown. An agreement from the Republican-controlled House was to sort of put a cap on spending, and it impacted the FY24 and the upcoming FY25 budget. So they do have a discretionary cap that they cannot exceed. So the funding for our agencies will have to be underneath that discretionary number. Again, we are working on a compressed calendar, one, because the budget was released a month late, two, because we're in an election year and Congress tends to take a bit more time off so that members can get back home and campaign. So it is inevitable that we will have a continuing resolution. The continuing resolutions fund the government in the current year based on the previous year's amount. So it's sort of like knowing you're going to get a raise but actually not getting it in your paycheck yet and still getting your paycheck the same as last year's paycheck. The question that we have with the continuing resolution is whether it will be something short to just get us through to maybe October or November, or whether they're going to say, no, let's wait and see what the outcome of the election is, and it might be a more beneficial environment after the November election, so they might do a continuing resolution into December. That's sort of the wild card right now, but almost everyone agrees there's no way Congress can get their job done between now and September 30th. And speaking of the election, so we have an election coming up in November. So the full House of Representatives is up for re-election. The way our government is structured is we have a representational House of the Representatives, and then we have the U.S. Senate. There are 435 representatives in the House, each representing a congressional district of approximately 750,000 citizens, or 750,000 people. Every 2 years, the whole House is up for re-election. In the Senate, we have 100 senators, equal distribution of senators across states regardless of size. So there are 2 senators from each state. Rhode Island gets 2, Texas gets 2. Because there are 100 senators and we didn't want to have an environment where all of our elected officials were up for re-election at the same time, we have a structure where 1/3 of the Senate, so approximately 33 or 34 senators every 2 years are up for re-election. So this year we have 34 senators up for re-election. And of course, we have the presidency. We have a presidential election happening as well. How can you miss that? So currently, the incredibly slim Republican majority, they have a 1-vote majority in the House of Representatives, is in question. The Democrats seem in good standing to regain control of the House of Representatives. However, there have been some redistricting changes and challenges to those redistricting changes that have fallen in favor of the Republicans. So it looks like if the Democrats take control of the House, they will not have a very large margin. We're looking at maybe 10 to 15 seats. That is still enough for them to be able to advance legislation without having to rely upon the Republican Party to do so, but it is not so large that they have a mandate to be able to go forth and do whatever they want. In the Senate, we have 20 Democrats and 3 independents who typically vote Democrat that are up for re-election versus just 11 Republicans. There's a 2-seat Democrat majority in the Senate right now, Chuck Schumer as our Senate leader. The Republicans look poised to take control of the Senate. They merely need to defend the 11 seats that they have up for re-election and pick off 3 of the 23 vulnerable Democrat seats. They are being helped out by some significant retirings. Senator Manchin from West Virginia has retired, opening that up to a probable Republican taking over his Democratic seat. There are a couple Democrats that have been targeted and challenged with strong Republican candidates. The prevailing trend is the Republicans will take control of the Senate and will have more than likely a 5 to 6 seat majority, at least for the next Congress, which is 2 years, which would take us to 2026. That means we're going to have a divided Congress, which is what we have now. One party controlling half of the Congress, one party controlling the other. It just means that the parties are going to switch. So a Republican-controlled House will flip to a Democrat-controlled House, and a Democrat-controlled Senate will flip to a Republican-controlled Senate. And the White House, as I said, anybody that can tell you who they think is going to win, there is just too much time between now and November to accurately predict what that outcome will be. But either way, You will have a president that has an agenda that aligns with only 50% of the Congress. So there will not be an opportunity for any of the presidents to push legislation through without some roadblocks, consideration, and debate. Well, that means it's even more important that we take a opportunity to weigh in and impact and try to have an impact on pieces of legislation and things that are important to us and our science. There are two main ways that you can impact Congress. You can do advocacy and you can do lobbying. Now, lobbying is not a dirty word. People seem to think, oh, lobbying. I'm a registered lobbyist. I lobby for really cool things, really great science that you and everyone else is doing. There are some similarities between advocacy and lobbying, and let me just talk about those a little bit. So the goals of advocacy are to, God, I'm so sorry. I'm not good at a non-Mac. So advocacy is attempting to cause political action using methods such as civil education, public campaigns, and outreach with the aim to change public opinion and garner public support. Advocacy strategy can include activities like articles in newspapers or op-eds, stories about how an individual or group was helped or benefited from a piece of legislation, and distribution of promotional or educational materials. Lobbying, however, refers to directly influencing the government and its leaders. And there's two types of lobbying. There's direct lobbying, which is communicating your views to a legislator or a government employee who may help develop legislation. For the intent of the communication needs to be very specific in order for it to be lobbying. It needs to refer to a specific bill, it needs to express your opinion on that bill, and it needs to call for an action on that bill. For example, asking Senator Smith to vote no on S123 or Congresswoman Jones to vote yes on HR 456. That is an example of direct lobbying. Grassroots lobbying is trying to influence other people to go forth and speak to their representatives along the same lines. It has some similarities in that it needs to refer to a specific piece of language and it needs to have a call for action, but grassroots lobbying also must provide a way in which this individual can then reach out to the legislator. So if you've ever seen a commercial that says, you know, Social Security benefits are being cut, call your senator now, tell them to take action, that's an example of grassroots lobbying. They give you the general phone number to call and they want individuals to help amplify their message. We tend to do, at SSA, we tend to do a combination of advocacy, some education and outreach, and some direct lobbying where we push and say this is a bill that needs to be, like when we're seeking reauthorization of programs. We're actively seeking those programs to be reauthorized. If we're talking about appropriations bills, we tend to do more advocacy on the appropriations bill side, talking about how cuts could be detrimental, educating members of Congress about the benefits of having this budget increased. But we tend to do more of the advocacy on the money side and lobbying on the authorization side. So there are reasons to impact Congress. As our society becomes more connected and national issues bleed into local ones and vice versa, people are getting more involved rather than just going into the polling booth in November and voting. At the national level, there are perennial issues and concerns that scientists and motivate people to action. There are budget deficits or reductions, there are administration priorities, or just be a science agency that aligns with the work that you're doing that you want to make sure gets the attention that it needs. But as you get involved, I want to stress it's important to remain as impartial as you can. I'll say this a couple times today. It seems odd to say to keep politics out of the political process, but that's what you really need to do. Stay focused on your goal, whether you're reaching out to educate and advocate or whether you're lobbying. Stay kind of focused on what your goal is to get the outcome that you seek and avoid expressing partisan views where you can. Explain your position, sticking to facts and figures, providing data, and telling personal stories or anecdotes. Those are the best ways to have an impact. Before you get started, though, I think you should do some research. So these are really just basic websites, house.gov, senate.gov. Enter in your zip code, and you can find out who represents you in Congress, both in the House and in the Senate. If you can, a few clicks will take you to their personal websites, and then you'll get a feel where you can get the phone numbers of their DC office and also all the local offices in your state nearby. I suggest that you get the DC office and then the district office closest to where you live and work. You can also find a treasure trove of information on these personal websites. Look at their issue statements. This gives you an indication of the priorities that the congressman or the senator has. Review their recent press releases, then you can see what sort of things they openly want to report and support on. Confirm their committee assignments to see if they sit on an appropriations committee or an authorizing committee that impacts your science. And then you can even see how they voted on previous issues. So you can see whether you've got some commonalities in that office or whether you're going to be fighting sort of an uphill battle to get them on your side. Even the pictures they use on the website will give you an indication of the things that they find important within their state or district. I know I just said it again, but there's only a handful of members in Congress that have a scientific background. They don't tend to come from the fields of science. So they rely upon their constituents and people like you to educate their staff and educate them so they can make sound decisions based on science. It's important that you help them cast these votes in the right way. That you took the time to reach out to them really has an impact on their office. A constituent took their personal time to come and address the member or a staffer means that you really care, and they do take note of that. Take your time to clarify your issue. Like I said, know exactly what you're looking for and try to hone your message a little bit. Do you want them to vote a certain way, or do you want them to be aware that these potential cuts are going to have an impact? Go ahead and figure out what it is you need them to do so you can have an ask. Congress and Senate staffers like to know what you want them to do, what you are asking them to do. They are prepared for you to say, now I need you to go do X, Y, and Z. Keep your message clear and concise. Try to avoid non-technical terms. You may be meeting with the science staffer in the office who has the most policy expertise, but not necessarily in your science. So try to do a more high-level discussion so that they can follow along with what you're saying. If you do end up speaking with someone who has a great scientific background, you can always drill down and get more into the weeds with them. But have your initial message be something a little more high-level. And then be prepared to answer what I call the why questions. And I think this is really important. It's important for you to understand why this is important to you so that you can explain it to the senator, but then you need to explain why it's important to them, why they should be concerned about it, and why they need to take action. So why it's important to you, why it's important to the senator, and why action is needed. I love this graphic. This so clearly highlights the differences in how people take in information. As scientists, you are trained to gather lots of background information, look at past efforts, bring in supporting details, explain a lot of the how and the why of how you got to where you are before you give your results and conclusions to your research. It validates your results and provides deep context for your research. But policy folks, we flip it upside down. They want the bullet first. They take it in much more differently. They want to know what is so cool about this, or what is so awesome about what you've done. Why is it important? Then they need to know the so what. What happens if this doesn't get funded? What happens if this program gets cut? Then you can give them the supporting details right there. So you have to sort of take your thinking and flip it on its head. We policy people have very short attention spans. So keep this in mind as you're potentially thinking about moving forward and talking to your members of Congress. Ways that you can connect with Congress. Simplest ways, pick up the phone and make a phone call. They have local offices in your state and in your district. They also have federal offices in DC. You can get those numbers from house.gov or senate.gov. Call them, they'll probably verify your zip code to make sure you are a constituent, and then you just tell them what your concerns are. Better yet, ask to be connected to the staffer in the office that handles those science issues, and then try to get a name and direct line, because that's the first step in developing a relationship within that office. You can also send an email. Emails, again, are a great, easy, low-lift way. Oftentimes, the websites have their own email form, but you can also call the office, get the name of the science staffer, and go ahead and send them an email. The format is very simple in the House. It's first name dot last name, so joe.smith@mail.house.gov. And in the Senate, it is first name underscore last name, so joe_smith at Senator Jones, so jones.senate.gov, murkowski.senator.gov. Fill in that subject line. Don't waste that valuable space. Let them know what it is that you are reaching out to them about. I am asking for a meeting, constituent request for a meeting. Concerns about Senate Bill 142. Let them know what the context of the email underneath is going to be about. Use that subject line. Again, make sure the email is easy to read and understand. Make sure you don't input too much technical jargon, and always, always, always provide contact information so they can follow up with you. Provide an email address and a phone number so they can reach out. If you have any sort of restrictions within your job that you are uncomfortable using your professional email address, go ahead and use a Gmail. They understand that. They won't think less of you because it's not coming from an institution branded or a government branded email account. Go ahead and use your gmail.com if that keeps things straight within your department. Email is a low cost barrier way to get involved. You can then step up your involvement. Meet in person. Come to DC. I'll take you out for coffee. Come to DC, or you can even meet them in the district office. This is a big investment, especially if you are making a trip to DC, but it also has the potential for the biggest payout. You can meet in their local offices when they're back home. You will probably have a greater chance of meeting the member themselves at a local visit, but the member will be dealing with 6,403 other things, so your impact might be less. Be flexible if you have the opportunity to be flexible. If you're trying to meet sometime in the month of June, offer them a few dates that you might be available to meet. If you do have a specific date, go ahead and let them know. Check the calendar if you can. There are some specific times when DC tends to be particularly busy, usually when a budget just comes out or just at the end of a fiscal year or before the Congress goes out on recess for, like, say, August recess. Staff's time is then very, very filled, and the shifting schedules for votes and committee hearings can make your schedule untenable. You might have a meeting scheduled and have to cancel at the last minute because they've just called a vote on the floor and the staffer with whom you were going to meet needs to go, help their boss. Go to a state event. I highly encourage you to reach out and go to the town halls or the listening sessions where your members of Congress are speaking. It's a great opportunity to get them unscripted and get them in a little more of a natural element. It also gives you a great opportunity to follow up on, when I met you at the town hall in September, I mentioned that I was going to be reaching out about the appropriations bill, so you get sort of that hook there. And state events are a great opportunity to meet the staff that service the local constituents at the local level. Another way to communicate is social media. This one I use with a double-edged sword. You can sign up on their websites to get what they call their push notifications, so email updates from them. You can also follow them on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube. It's a great opportunity to use back channel communications. If you had a fantastic meeting with a staffer, put it up on Twitter, put it up on Instagram and said, just had a great meeting with Joe Smith in Congressman Jones's office. Really receptive to the concerns that we're facing with budget cuts to the science programs. Give that staffer a shout out. Those channels are not clearly managed by the member themselves. They're curated by a staffer, but the fact that you have connected with them, again, is also recorded and monitored within the office. My note of caution is, remember, when you reach out and follow somebody, they now have access back to your socials as well. So they will take a look and see how you've interacted with members of Congress in the past. Don't be a troll, though. Don't try to call them out. Don't try to confront them on social media. It just doesn't usually end well for anyone. So I keep those interactions positive and upbeat as well. So as I stated, there's only a few members of Congress that have a science background. So you may have an immediate goal of passing a bill or seeing a budget replenished, but your long-term goal should be building a relationship with that legislative office. Don't just reach out to them in times of trouble. Be there for the good times too. So the best way to do that is just overcoming the initial inertia of making that initial contact. Sometimes that's huge. You don't know what to say, you don't know how to reach out, but I tell you, if you just get that first initial contact done, that's right. Then you'll get the right person with whom you can connect on issues going forward. I do like to stress authenticity, although I think it's kind of being overused now, but in that, what I mean is stay true to yourself. Stay true to your science and what's important to you. Don't try to think and change the way that you're presenting your issues based on what you think they want to hear. When you are passionate about what you do, it's infectious. And when you're telling stories or anecdotes, talking about how you've solved a problem or you've made this great discovery, you're animated and you draw them into your world when you are authentically excited about the work that you do. They will then look at you as a trusted source of information, and that's the goal. You want them to reach out to you and think of you as their subject matter expert when it comes to these issues. Just like every relationship, though, it needs some work. You need to do some consistent follow-up. You need to not just be one and done when you've made this contact. Use AI to your advantage. Set a reminder on your calendar to reach out to those members, those staffers every 4 weeks to 6 weeks. Forward them interesting articles. If you just got written up in your local school paper for what you've done, send that along. If you've written an op-ed, send that along. Send the link to a podcast that seems compelling or interesting. Again, these little touch points of keeping them engaged with your science and what you're doing go a long way to establishing a good relationship, and again, where they see you as their trusted source of unbiased information on these issues, and that's the goal. You want them to see you as their expert, their private little expert in their office that nobody else has access to. And then, for lack of a better term, I call it broad engagement. And by that, I mean just follow them all the ways that you can. Sign up for their newsletters, try to go see them at town hall meetings or local events, follow them on Twitter in a positive way, but just have more than just an email relationship with that office. Try to show that you are well-rounded and engaged in very different issues. Again, that shows that you have value for the office, and they will think of you when it comes time for them to answer questions or talk about budget issues. So what do you do if it's an office that has different viewpoints? Like, you may think to yourself, Ted Cruz is never going to believe in climate change. Well, the goal is the same, right? Even with an office with whom you have different viewpoints, the goal is the same: to foster strong relationships, to better impact your science and your issues. So all the same things apply. Making the initial contact, doing the consistent follow-up, being broadly engaged where you can, but this is where you need to add an extra level of patience. You want to work really hard to be as authentic as you can without bias. And so I say try to meet them where they are. With offices that may appear to not have anything in common with what you're doing, a complete opposite viewpoint, it's even more important that you do a little more research. See what types of issues they do support, see what types of bills they have introduced and voted on, and look for commonalities. There is going to be something that you can find a connection on. If they're fiscally motivated, tell them how your science saves money, either through remediation on the back end or cost up front. If they're fiscally motivated, that will resonate with them. You may have to look a little bit deeper, but there will be points of intersection that you can capitalize on. Whenever possible, try to bring your science back to the local level. Bare minimum, every office is concerned of how the things that you're doing impact people back home. So if there's a way that you can tie that into the back home, you will always have an opportunity to have a conversation with them. And then this one, control what you can. You can't control what they think or how they're going to react, but you can control the data that you give them. You can control the information that you provide that office. So be consistent and stay true to your science. Present the value of your work where you can in as many ways as possible. Resist the urge to avoid the office. It might be easier to think, I'm just going to not even contact them. They'll be voted out at the next election. Or maybe not, and now you've missed an opportunity to really get in there and have some engagement. So don't avoid the office. Have the tough conversation, but try to be the positive force in the room. You will find a way to make a connection with them. It may take longer, and you may not be received with the open arms that you are in other offices, but you will have an opportunity to develop that long-term relationship as well. Okay. Some last helpful things before I leave you and we can open it up to questions. Anytime you can contact your member of Congress is a good time to contact the member of Congress. We used to have consistent times where this was budget season, this was this season. With continuing resolutions and all the things that are going on, there is never a bad time to reach out. There are some times that make more sense. If you are looking to impact the budget process, reaching out in February and March is a better time to talk budget, because that's usually when the president's budget's been released, the numbers are available, and you have something to work against. If you're talking about authorization, you have a bill that's going to expire, NEHRP, or another bill that's going to expire, you usually want to start 18 to 24 months before the end of that program authorization to soften the ground and let them know this is something they need to work on. If it is a new piece of authorizing legislation for a new program, buckle up. The average time is 7 years to get a bill from thought to introduction to passage. And that can include many starts and stops, bills that are introduced in a Congress and then don't pass. And so when a new election rolls around and a new Congress is sworn in, you have to start all over and find another champion. You may have a fantastic champion who then decides to retire, and the person that was going to take the charge of moving this piece of legislation forward is no longer in Congress. It can take 7 years. You just have to sort of buckle up. But that's where the consistency comes in, and when you've developed these long-term relationships with staff, that's where you have the consistency. Appropriations are every year, so we fight that battle every year. There is always some piece of legislation that is about to expire. Again, we use about an 18 to 24 month lead time to keep it interesting, to make sure it's a raise to the attention level of the staff. But yeah, there's never a bad time to reach out to your member of Congress. So a couple last things. Staffers are your friends. People think, oh, I met with Congressman Jones, I met with Senator Smith. That's fantastic, and it makes a great photo op, and it's really great to put on your own social medias or whatnot. But they work at such a high level, they're not always aware of the intricacies and the details of your program or your issues, but the staffer, that's the person you want to impress the most. That's the person you want to be saying your story as they talk to the chief of staff, who then talks to the member of Congress themselves. So having a meeting with a staffer, that's not a sign that they don't take your issue seriously. That is actually the person that you want to impress the most. I highly advise having a one-pager or something that concisely has your points of view on it that you can send as a PDF, so the staff person has your words in front of them when they're talking to their boss and their boss's boss about this issue. So they're repeating exactly what it is that you want them to say. Again, one other thing when you meet with staff, don't take it personally if you end up meeting in the hallway. It does not reflect on the value of your science or what you're doing. It reflects on how busy the office is. I've had meetings standing up in the hallway. I've had a staffer say, it's 1 o'clock and I haven't even had a cup of coffee yet. Can we go to the cafeteria? You go to the cafeteria. You sort of go where they are. It is not a reflection of how they feel about the NEHRP program. And don't give up. It may seem like it's a daunting task, but I've been doing this for quite a long time. It is sort of my sports junkiness, but don't give up. Members of Congress are in it for the long haul, and you should be too. So, all right, let's open it up to questions. Again, I'm Elizabeth Duffy. If you have any questions, my email's up there. Thank you. That was on 2 cups of coffee. All right, who's got a question? Yes. Hi, Mark. Never. Very rarely. I won't say never, but very rarely.
You mentioned that science cuts have been part of the appropriations recently.
Mm-hmm.
These science agencies under the Biden presidency.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is that during the Trump presidency, the budget requests were to reduce funding, but the Congress-approved appropriations actually increased funding.
Correct. So Mark's asking a question of how often the president's budget request lines up with the actual appropriations that Congress approved. And I flippantly said never, but I can't confirm that, but I will say very rarely. The president's budget request is like a 6-year-old putting out their wish list to Santa Claus. The president's budget request says, this is how I want to spend the money, this is the priority of our administration, and if we have, I understand these are the fiscal constraints that the Treasury told me, just like Mom saying, pick 3, and I'm going to list all 5 anyway. So they recognize that the opportunistic and optimistic budget that they put out is very, very seldom passed as is, because the way our Constitution is written, Congress has the authority. They control the purse strings. Congress can say, that's lovely, but you're not getting that, and you're not getting that, because we as Congress think this is more important, and we're going to allocate funds over here. So the general belief is that under a Republican president, science programs do poorly. That's not necessarily true. And the inverse is also not necessarily true, that under a Democrat president, science budgets expand, because Congress is the wild card. They get to ultimately decide what goes into those appropriations bills. So under the Trump administration, if you just look at numbers, it looks like science and certain science programs within the government did exceedingly well, because their top line numbers were increased to match the priorities of that administration. So those top line numbers were increased for oil and gas extraction, for critical minerals, for other types of things that aligned with the Trump agenda. What was cut to make room for those increases? Climate, earth sciences, some of the additional things that NASA does, because we created Space Force under the Trump administration. So, you know, it looks like if you just look at the number, you go, oh, yay, NASA did really well, NOAA did really well. No, they got increases in programs that aligned with the Republican agenda. Under the Democrat Biden administration, there are very whole thought out programs. I will say that this administration has done a fantastic job of really concertedly looking at the budgets and trying to find where the increases are best served. They've been trying to look at agencies that have been historically underfunded and add money to it. Climate is clearly a big agenda for this administration, so they restored a lot of the cuts that the Trump administration put in. The shift from an oil and gas-based economy to an electric-based economy, those are things that they're looking to promote. So again, some budgets look like they've gone up because those areas have been increased, but other areas have gone down, so the overall impact is sort of the same. When you see sweeping changes to programs is when you have one party that controls the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. And that's what happened during the first 2 years of the Biden administration, and that's why we were able to get the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And contained within those two supplemental bills was an incredible amount of additional money for science-based programs. The probability of a BIL number 2 and an additional Inflation Reduction Act is very slim. So you see a lot of programs. I'll talk about one that's not necessarily seismic focused, but within the USGS, within the CSS, there's a program called Earth MRI, which has been a small program, $10, $11 million for several years, and it is to map and locate domestic sources of critical minerals as defined by USGS and Interior and Department of Commerce. There was a lot of money that was added in the BIL for that, an extra $64 million a year. So that program went from 10 to $74 million a year and is going to fall off a cliff when that BIL money dries up. So the opportunity for a Republican-controlled presidency with at least one house of the one chamber of the Congress as a Republican-controlled chamber issuing another BIL is very slim. The probability of a Democrat-controlled White House with at least a partially controlled Democrat Congress with the House of Representatives increases the chances that at least a BIL-2 will be introduced, but whether it moves is another question. So the administration can propose, but Congress actually, as they say, if the administration proposes, Congress disposes. I probably could have said that first. Another question? All right, I did it. Nobody has any other questions? All right, well, fantastic. Thank you all. I am at the registration desk and around. If something comes up, you have a question, just find me. Clearly, I'm in the bright pink sweater. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciate it.